Hello and welcome to part 5 of the Lockdown in Lockdown read through. I look a bit different today. I have gone for the rather fetching man-bun, just to keep my hair out of my face because it does get a bit annoying. But other than that, things are the same as they have been for the last 4 read-throughs. We are now on, I don't know what chapter we're on now, but we are now at the point of the book where Alex has just arrived inside Furness Penitentiary. He got accused of murdering his best friend Toby. He got sent to life without parole at Furness Penitentiary, and he is now here. He has met the black suits, the huge guards with the silver eyes. He's met the Weezers with their twisted faces and their gas masks, and he's just met Warden Cross, who is not a nice guy, and the skinless dogs. So yeah, really not the kind of place you'd want to spend the rest of your life. Anyway, Alex has just found out his new cellmate is a guy called Carl Donovan, and we're about to find out a little bit more about him. So settle in, grab a cup of tea if you haven't already got one. And, enjoy. Settling in. The kid called Carl led me across to the back of the courtyard, never once turning to see if I was following. He bounded up a set of stairs and I ran to keep up with him, tripping on more than one step in my desperation not to be left behind. At one point I heard the siren again and completely missed my footing, scraping my shin on the sharp metal and crying out in pain. I looked back out over the yard to see the massive vault door swing open and the macabre group vanish into the wall, all except for the men in black suits who stalked the floor with their shotguns. Carl leaped up 5 more flights of stairs without so much as panting. By the time I'd caught up with him, I was breathing like a broken vacuum cleaner and sweating like a sumo wrestler in a sauna. He was standing outside our cell, looking impatient, and I apologised as I walked past him through the door. I don't really know what I'd been expecting. I knew it wouldn't be the Hilton or even a travel lodge, but when I'd thought about my cell, I'd pictured something the same size as my old room, with a bed and a wardrobe and maybe even a plant or something. As it was, I had to stop short as soon as I entered the tiny room, or else I'd have banged my nose on the far wall. The cell was little bigger than our garden shed, and most of that was taken up by a set of metal bunks that looked better suited to 8-year-olds having a sleepover. Aside from a toilet wedged into one corner, the only other thing in there was a bad smell. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath. I felt another wave of panic wash over me as I pictured the rest of my life crammed into this tiny space, and I bit my lip hard to get it under control. "It ain't much, but it's home," said Carl, pushing me out of the way and leaping onto the top bunk. "And this one's mine." I sat down on the lower bed and stared out of the bars, which made up one whole wall of the cell. All I could see on the other side of the giant pit were more cells and more prisoners, their grey faces a reflection of my own. I thought about just running out of the cell and jumping over the balcony ahead, 6 floors up and a hard rock below. 3 or 4 seconds and it would all be over. But there was no way. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet, anyway. 6 floors isn't enough, came the voice above me, deep but surprisingly tuneful. I raised an eyebrow, wondering if he'd been reading my mind. It's okay. It's the first thing any of us think about, and I've seen people do it too, jump from pretty much every level. Well, the ones that are open anyway. First couple of floors you get sprained ankles and a few bruises. Levels 3 through 6 you get broken up pretty bad, but you don't die. Not unless you hit head first, which isn't easy. You really want to bite the dust, then you've got to go up. Level 7 or 8. That ought to do it. I heard the bed creak and shake as he changed position. "Funny thing is," he went on, "you go any higher and you don't die either. I saw one kid go from the 10th floor, but he just bounced and screamed. Died a bit later, yeah, but I don't want to know what he went through first." I shuddered at the thought and promised myself I'd never jump, no matter how bad things got. The bed creaked again, and a head appeared from over the top bunk. I was surprised to see it was smiling. "Name's Donovan," he said. "Always thought it sounded better than Carl. You're Sawyer, right?" Alex, I replied, not quite ready to abandon my first name. Alex, right. He sprang from the bunk and landed gracefully on the cell floor before sitting next to me and looking me up and down. You seem like a good kid anyway. You have to be careful around here. You get some real nasty freaks. Killers, you know? He laughed. Well, we're all killers, but there are two kinds. The ones who did it for fun and the ones who did it because they had no choice. And the ones who didn't do it? I added with a sad smile. Yeah, we've been getting a few of them around here lately. I poked my flat pillow mournfully and lifted the sheet. It was so thin I could see right through it like grease-proof paper. Not that I thought I'd get cold. The air in here was hot and heavy, like we were sitting in an oven. Have you been here long? I asked. He gave a kind of spluttered laugh that had absolutely no humour in it. 5 years, Alex. I'm first generation. I'd already been in prison for a couple of months, miles away from here. Geez, that place was nice. Spacious cells, leisure facilities, a rec room. It was like a country club compared to this. They transferred everyone under 18 to Furnace as soon as it opened, so that all you other kids could see what happened when you did bad things. But you were framed, right? But by the men in black? Me? No. He paused for a minute, looking out through the bars, but obviously miles away. The black suits have framed a lot of the people in here, but I'm as guilty as they come. I killed my mum's boyfriend because he was beating her up every night. Just couldn't take it anymore. I snapped, hit him with a candlestick. It was a lucky hit, I guess, for an 11-year-old, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. And they put you away? I asked incredulously. New laws had just come in, the ones clamping down on youth crime. That was the year of all the murders, the summer of slaughter as everyone calls it. Even though I had nothing to do with the gangs, the government was using all cases of juvie murder as warnings. So they gave me life. The irony is my mum, well, she couldn't handle it. He stopped and looked away, and I swear I could feel his rage like some kind of force emanating from him. How do you tell the time in here anyway? I asked, trying to change the subject. There's no sun, no clocks. You can't, he replied, obviously glad for the new topic of conversation. You just go by the sirens, and by lockdown at the end of the day, rhythms here are completely different, but you get used to them. He got up and walked to the cell door. On that note, let me show you around. I could do with some grub, and it's trough time soon. I pushed myself up off the bed, but not before noticing a series of gashes that ran along the wall, 5 lines etched into the rock from the bed to the door. He saw me looking at them and frowned. You'll get to know all about that soon enough, he whispered. What are they? They look like they were made by fingernails. I was joking, but from the way his expression hardened, I realised it was true. This place isn't right, he went on, leaning in towards me so close I could feel his spit on my face. You're never safe here, because one day it will be your turn to be taken. Maybe a week, maybe years, maybe tonight. Some go quietly, some don't. Adam didn't. He went screaming and clawing at the wall and fighting for his life. He ran his finger along one of the grooves, then he turned his attention back to me. In the dead of night they come for you, Alex, he said. Sooner or later, they come for everyone. The goosebumps stayed on my arms all the way down the stairs as I fired question after question at Donovan's back. But now that we were out of the cell, his air of hard indifference had returned, and he ignored me. He only started talking again as we were walking across the courtyard, but the smile was nowhere to be seen. Sorry about the Jekyll and Hyde act, kid, he said through a mouth of stone, his eyes glaring hard at everyone we passed. In this place you got to act tough all the time or else they pick you off. When I asked who they were, he nodded at the group of boys in the corner wearing the black bandanas. Kevin was there, but Montgomery, the bigger kid, was nowhere to be seen. The pirates? I asked. Donovan made a noise from his nose that I thought might have been a laugh. Yeah, the pirates, otherwise known as the Skulls. They were one of the groups responsible for the Summer of Slaughter. They're not the only gang here, but they're easily the worst. They all carry shanks. He noticed my confusion. Like homemade knives. They make them out of anything and everything they can find. Rock, cutlery, even bone. Not afraid to use them either. We had crossed the courtyard and arrived at a large crack in the rock that led into a tunnel. Like everything else, it blended into the red walls perfectly, which is why I hadn't spotted it before. There were 2 more wall-mounted machine guns here, one pointing right at us and one directed through the opening. Ignoring them, Donovan strode forward. "Give the gangs a wide berth if you want to stay in one piece," he went on, as we made our way through the tunnel. "Around here, the guards don't give a crap if we kill each other, and those kids don't have anything to lose. It's not like their sentence can get any longer if they kill anyone else, if you follow me." I did, although I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. "So is that who comes at night? The gangs?" This time Donovan laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the walls and making me jump. He simply shook his head and walked on, leading me out into another chamber of bare rock. This one was full of tables and benches, most of which were currently empty. At the far end of the room was a deserted canteen, not unlike the one at school. The ceiling here was much lower, bearing down on me as we walked towards the nearest table. The fleshy walls made me feel like I was in the stomach of some giant monster, a place to get digested, not to eat. "Welcome to the trough room," he said. "This is where you get your 3 tasty, nutritious meals of the day. Steak, salmon, venison, champagne, truffles, the works." "Seriously?" I asked, a flicker of hope igniting inside me like a drug. "Sure, I guess. Trouble is you can never be too sure what you're getting because it's blended up with about a ton of sawdust and served as a paste. I like to think that what we're eating used to be real food." The flicker died, along with my appetite. We took seats opposite one another as the prisoners slowly made their way into the canteen where the food was served. A few minutes later, 2 short bursts of the siren sounded and the crowd inside the canteen started to swell. "How did you know what time it was?" I asked, as a door behind the canteen opened and a sweaty inmate emerged, struggling to hold a vast container. "Like I said, you just get a knack for it," Donovan replied. He got to his feet and started walking towards the canteen. I made to follow, but he waved for me to sit back down again, shouting over his shoulder, "Allow me." I watched him go. The inmates were all hovering around the canteen, but there was no queue. Not that I really expected one in a place like this. It was more like vultures picking at a corpse. The strong ones got priority, barging past everyone else to be served first. I don't know whether it was a relief or a shock to see Donovan plough his way to the front, the smaller kids backing away from him and hovering on the outside of the throng. But even he stood to one side to let the skulls through, never taking his eyes off them as they snatched their food and walked away. I was distracted from the spectacle by a gentle hand on my shoulder and swung my head around to see Z. He sat down on the bench beside me and leaned in close, his face twisted in panic. "Oh, this place is like a death camp," he whispered. "What with the gangs and the guns and those scary guards?" "The black suits," I said. Z shuddered. "I've even got bloodstains on the floor of my cell, for Christ's sake." I thought about the marks on my wall, but I didn't say anything. "Well, what's your guy like?" Z said. "Carl." "Donovan," I answered, watching him across the floor with 2 trays of food. "He's nice. I was lucky, I think. What about you?" "Yeah, okay. Quiet kid. We wouldn't say boo to a goose, as my gran used to say." "I don't blame him," I answered. "I once got chased around a park by a goose. I could swear it was trying to break my arm. They're evil." We were both giggling when Donovan arrived back, and he looked at us as if we were crazy. "Usually takes a few weeks for people to crack up in here," he said as he sat down, sliding my tray across the table. "Don't tell me you 2 have lost it already." "Donovan, this is Z." They nodded at each other, although both remained wary. "Another new fish," said Donovan, shoveling his food into his mouth. "I'd get it while it was hot if I were you. Not that this crap is hot." I looked at the mound of grey mush in front of me and instantly thought about the mess I'd made on the prison bus. They looked alike, and the smell wasn't too dissimilar either. It felt like my stomach was tying itself in knots, and I pushed the tray towards Z. "Help yourself," I said, but he had turned green at the sight of the food and looked like he was on the verge of chundering as well. Donovan's eyes were twinkling with affectionate humour. "A few more days and this will seem like heavenly macaroni cheese," he said, pulling the tray towards him. "It's surprising what you can get used to when you're starving." Next chapter. Skirmish. Despite the food, I began to feel a bit more relaxed during trough time. With a little imagination, I could almost pretend that I was back at school, chatting with friends over hot lunches, which admittedly hadn't been much prettier than this anyway, and just enjoying time away from lessons. Instead of talking about teachers, soccer and girls, though, we discussed life inside Furness, but even that seemed distant, like we were chatting about a film we'd seen on television or some new computer game. So, there really is no way out, Z asked when Donovan had finished eating. The older boy had scoffed 2 helpings of muck and was eyeing the canteen hopefully on the chance that there was any left. I mean, there's no tunnels or secret exits. First off, you better watch what you say and who you say it to, Donovan answered, giving up on thirds and returning his attention to the table. To the warden, talking about escaping is the same as escaping. And I can't even bring myself to tell you what happened to the last guy who actually made a break for it. Second, yeah, this place is full of tunnels, but they all only go in one direction, down. This prison is wedged in a massive gorge, and as far as I know, there are tunnels in the rock that go much deeper than this. They use some of them for storage and some for the warden's offices, and I know from personal experience that the hole is down there. The hole, Z and I both asked together. Solitary. I was down there for 3 days after I got into a fight with some gang wranglers. Not the skulls, the leopards. They're not really around anymore. Anyway, it's just a hole in the ground right at the bottom of the prison, and they lock you in it, with no light or food and only a pipe for a toilet. The only water you get is the condensation on the walls. His face had paled from the memory. After a day, you think you're going crazy. After 2 days, you think you're in hell. After 3 days, you lose a little piece of yourself that you don't get back. I never heard of anyone being in there more than 4 days and surviving. That place drives your soul right out of your body. It's the screams you hear when you're down there. They're like demons. They don't ever shut up. He shook his head, seeming to come out of a trance. I'll die before I go back there. I didn't know what to say, so I kept my mouth closed, but Z didn't seem as fazed by the threat of solitary confinement. But some of those tunnels must go somewhere, he said. I mean, underground passageways, that sort of thing. Well, you're welcome to try, replied Donovan, with more than a hint of sarcasm. I don't think you'd be the first, and I doubt you'll be the last, but believe me when I say that the hole isn't the worst thing you'll find behind these walls. Hey, maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe they'll take you tonight, and you'll see for yourself. Take me? Asked Z. Take me where? But Donovan wasn't listening. Z turned to me, but I just shrugged. He slumped back on the bench, obviously annoyed. So, your old cellmate, Adam, was he your friend? I asked, changing the subject. Friend, Donovan replied, as if trying to remember the word. You don't have friends in here. You'll soon come to understand that. You get attached to someone, then you'll just lose them. They'll get shanked, or they'll jump, or they'll be taken one night. When they reach 18, they get sent up to level 15, and you'll lose them then too. Not that many survive to 18. He paused when a shout echoed across the room, starting again when it died away. Don't make friends. Don't make connections. They'll see it, and it will get you both killed. Don't make the mistake of bringing your heart down here with you. There is no place for it in Furness. The shout rang out again, angrier this time. Donovan seemed to freeze. His hackles raised, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. There was a growing tension in the room. You could almost see it like a black shadow seeping over the tables and compressing the air. It was emanating from a bench on the opposite side of the trough room, where 2 inmates were on their feet and nose to nose. Let's go, Donovan hissed, getting up. Other people were doing the same, eyeing the confrontation warily as they made for the exit. What's going on? Z asked. Trouble, was his reply, and we don't want to be anywhere near it. As if on cue, there was another sound and a metallic crash. I looked back to see one of the boys reeling backwards, a red gash in his head where something had struck him. His attacker was preparing for another blow, the tray raised above his head, the sharp edge directed forwards like an axe. Can't we do something? I asked, but we'd reached the tunnel and Donovan was already walking inside. Feel free, he shouted over his shoulder. I stood and watched for a moment longer, but as the makeshift blade descended, I was pushed forward by the crowd and the moment was lost behind the blood-red wall. For the next few minutes, chaos reigned in Furness. We emerged into the yard just as one long blast rang out from the siren. The sound seemed to activate the machine guns lined up along the walls. They spun out towards the crowd of panicking inmates, their slick, smooth movements reminding me of some crazy homicidal robot on the rampage. The deafening wail of the siren had the effect of a fuel injection on everybody in the giant room. It was like somebody had hit the fast forward button, making the inmates move at a ridiculous speed. Most were running for the stairs, their fear palpable as they pushed each other out of the way. Even Donovan was jogging across the yard, his usual calm expression twisted into a mask of apprehension. He shouted something, but it was lost in the noise of the stampede and the unending scream of the siren. The terror was contagious, flooding my mind and making my head swim. I felt something crash into me from behind, and I sprawled out over the hard ground, a sharp pain running up my arm from a twisted wrist. Ahead of me lay an engine of legs, each a piston that trampled everything in its path. I struggled to get up, but something struck my arm out from under me. I wrapped my hands around my head and curled into a ball as the kicks rained in from every side, just wishing for it to be over, to wake up from this sick nightmare. After what seemed like an eternity, I felt somebody grab my wrist hard and haul me up. I resisted for a second, but the force was insistent, and I relented. Opening my eyes, I saw Donovan above me, his expression furious. Digging his fingers into my flesh, he pulled me along with the tide, shoving other kids out of the way until we reached the stairs. I followed without thinking, my brain too exhausted to do anything other than put one foot in front of the other. It wasn't very successful at that either. Like the aftermath of a tsunami, the flood had died to a trickle by the time we reached the 6th level, buoying us into our cell only seconds before the siren cut out. The absence of sound was almost as disturbing as the noise itself. The prison had been plunged into a gulf of silence, broken only by the occasional sob. But it didn't last. With a noise a little like the one a roller coaster makes as it's being pulled up a slope, the cell doors began to slide shut. 1,000 gates sealing with a boom that made the very stone tremble. Donovan had slumped onto my bed and was wiping beads of sweat off his brow. I didn't even have the energy to make it to the bunks and just slid down the cold metal bars until my knees hit the floor. For a moment, neither of us did anything but pant. My whole body was aching. My stomach felt like it was unpeeling itself, like it was coming apart. I offered silent prayers of thanks that I hadn't eaten any dinner. Below, on the ground floor, I could see the vault door opening and a dark shadow sweep across the yard towards the trough room. There must have been 12 or 13 black suits down there, armed with guns. "Dogs?" asked Donovan in a whisper. Then, when I didn't answer, "The dogs, are they out there?" I watched the vault door swing shut, but nothing else had come out. I shook my head, not quite able to speak. Donovan muttered a thank you to someone or something, and I heard him collapse back onto the bed. "Is anyone out of their cell?" he went on. I scanned the circumference of the prison and saw dozens of faces peering out through the bars at the events unfolding below, but everyone seemed to be locked up pretty tight. I shook my head again, then twisted around on my knees and found a more comfortable position, leaning against the wall. "Jesus," Donovan said eventually, directing his words at the bunk above him. "Talk about an induction. You've been here a couple of hours and you've seen a skirmish and a lockdown. You should consider yourself lucky." "Lockdown?" I asked, not feeling in the least bit lucky. "That siren, that long one, it translates as get the hell back in your cell in the next minute or your arse is grass," he explained, finally turned to look at me. "Lockdown is one of the worst things that can happen here. This one isn't too bad, it's just the guards. That skirmish in the trough room must have triggered it. Sometimes fights do, sometimes they don't. The worst lockdowns come for no reason. One minute you're playing cards in the yard, and the next you're all running for your lives, trampling each other so you don't get torn to pieces when..." He paused, his voice catching in his throat. I didn't want to press him. Something about his expression made me hold my tongue. Besides, I wasn't sure I wanted to know anymore. I clambered up off the floor and walked to the bunk, sitting down at the foot of the bed and putting my head in my hands. Donovan swung himself around so that we were sitting side by side. "Look," I said sheepishly, "I just want to say thanks. Thanks for coming back for me. I would have been pummeled out there." He looked at me and nodded, but his eyes were cold. Don't mention it. But don't expect it again. I told you there are no friendships here, no loyalties. I helped you because you're new and because when there's two people in a cell, then there's only a 50% chance they'll take you. You'd better wise up, Alex. I'm not your guardian angel. I knew already that Carl Donovan was many things, but he was a terrible liar. I found myself smiling inside, although a sliver of that smile must have escaped through my eyes because Donovan caught it. I don't know what you're so happy about, he muttered, but that tiny smile was contagious and took strength from the adrenaline that still pounded through our arteries. He flashed a wide grin at me, all white teeth against his dark skin, and gave me a gentle cuff around the back of the head. You're crazy. You know that? You belong in here. No doubt about that. I just nodded. We sat in silence for a few minutes, our heartbeats gradually slowing and the rasps disappearing from our breaths. It wasn't long before I saw movement below and walked over to the bars to see the crowd of black suits head back across the yard, carrying the wounded kid between them. He wasn't moving, and there was a thin red line on the stone floor that trailed behind the group as they disappeared through the massive door. Are they taking him to the infirmary? I asked, quite pleased with myself, despite everything, for remembering the posh word for a prison hospital. Something like that. Donovan clambered up into his own bunk and lay facing the ceiling. Anyway, lockdowns this late don't tend to finish until morning, so I'd make myself comfortable if I were you. Be lights out in an hour or two. I looked around the cell and tried to imagine what I'd do for an hour or two. The thought felt like a weight pressing on my chest. And once again I found myself panicking at the idea of spending the rest of my life in this tiny cell. The sensation ran up through my body, and when it reached my brain it was so powerful that for a moment I saw lights popping on and off before my eyes. I wanted to tear through the bars and fight my way back to the surface so I could be free again. Instead, I just stamped my foot hard against the floor, so pathetically that not even Donovan heard it. The feeling ebbed from my body, unsatisfied, and I collapsed on my bunk. So, is this what you do all evening then? I asked eventually. Sit and stare at the ceiling and rot away quietly. Pretty much, he replied, laughing. The bed squeaked as he turned over. To be honest, with jobs and all, you're usually dead to the world by lights out, so you don't mind the peace and quiet. Jobs? You'll find out all about it tomorrow, he replied. I could hear his voice starting to slur, like he was drifting off already. You think we just sit about all day? Sitting around, duelling with canteen trays and running from the guards? Yeah. Oh, and listen, he said, his voice alive again. He popped his head over the bunk and fixed me with a glare that made my pulse race. If you hear a siren during lights out and the blood lights are on, then you don't get out of bed for any reason, okay? Doesn't matter what you hear outside those bars, keep your eyes closed and pretend to be asleep. Don't draw attention to yourself, and especially not to this cell. I tried to say something, but he cut me off. No exceptions. They catch you looking, then you're as good as dead already. He vanished, leaving me wide awake and terrified. Sweet dreams, Alex. Okay, so that's the end of this one. I'll be back tomorrow for the next chapter. Darkness falls, and we shall see what awaits Alex inside Furnace Penitentiary. By the way, if anyone would like to know more about Adam, Donovan's cellmate, then I did write a prequel, a Christmas-themed prequel to Furnace called Silent Night. I'll put the link below this video. If you're watching on Facebook or anything else, then just click over to YouTube and you'll find the link, or you can go to my website alexandergordonsmith.com and you'll find out a little bit more about Donovan and Alex in the prison. Sorry, Donovan and Adam in the prison before Alex arrives. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm really enjoying this. It's really great for me to explore this book again, and yeah, I will be back tomorrow to carry on. Stay safe, everyone. Yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye.